is the Vanguard podcast. I'm Gavin.
And I'm Zac.
And we're so pleased to welcome to the show today, Mckayla Wilkes, primary challenger to Steny Hoyer in Maryland's 5th Congressional District. How you doing today, Mckayla?
I'm doing okay. Thanks for asking.
Cool. Well, something I wanted to start off with in this interview and just gauge your opinion on a little bit is just your opinion on the job performance of the progressive members that are already in Congress. Obviously, you've branded yourself as a progressive and you support a lot of the, policy positions that one would find, members of the squad championing. But I'm wondering if you think that they've been effective thus far in pushing the Biden administration or the party leadership in the House to the left. If so, can you potentially point to any strategies you think that they've exhibited, which you would emulate? And if not, what methods of applying pressure would you potentially utilize if you were to get into the legislature and have an opportunity to potentially influence the direction of legislation?
Yeah, so I think that the members of the squad in Congress, I think that they're doing, the best that they can do, given that they are very small in numbers. If I were to be elected, I think something that's really important is, as an organizer, is to not to forget that you still have to keep organizing. The organizing doesn't stop. You just go from organizing on the ground to organizing your colleagues. And so that's a strategy that I would like to implement, should I become elected. You have to meet with your colleagues and garner that support so that when you go to introduce legislation or if you want to go and oppose legislation, that you have that infrastructure and you have that solidarity with your colleagues moving forward. And I think that that's maybe something that may be lacking in Congress amongst the squad. You can't just organize within, those who have similar ideologies, but you have to also try to reach those others that may be more moderates or centrist.
Yeah, I'm wondering what your reaction is to kind of it seems like multiple failures so far of the Biden administration. They, the Democrats they ran largely on this promise of $2,000 checks. They immediately dropped that down to $1,400. Now it's March. There's, they talked about having that immediately after the runoffs in Georgia. That didn't happen. We still haven't seen those checks. True, it was passed in the House, but in its current form that it was passed in the House, it's definitely not going to pass in the Senate. Then you also have the fact that today we found out that the $15 minimum wage is not going to be passed as part of a package through the Senate, thanks to 8 senators, all Democrats. 58 senators, 8 of the Democrats that we kind of anticipated. And I'm just wondering how that changes your strategy as somebody who's running as a Democrat, somebody who's running on these progressive platforms. Does it make it harder for you to make your case to people if they say, well, you guys said that last time and then we elected you and, nothing happened? The Dems always say that they want to give us stuff and then they never do. It's always just they always look for a scapegoat and then they pretend like they're doing right now with this minimum wage that Kamala Harris couldn't just override the Senate parliamentarians' decision, and get this passed with 51 votes. But how does that impact the way that you strategize and how does that impact the way that you talk to voters who are, probably rightly pissed off at the Democratic administration right now?
Yeah, I think to that, I say what we're witnessing is business as usual. This is how it always is. Every time there's a campaign season or election time, they fight for our votes and then they get our votes and then we see the same thing. But that's one of the reasons why I am running for Congress, because Hoyer is one of those people who's been in Congress for, almost 40 years. He's serving his 20th term. And nothing is changing. And the thing is, we have to change who's representing us. And unfortunately, I think that that's what it's going to come down to, because we just don't have enough progressive members, true progressives, true leftists in Congress to pass, the legislation, that we're fighting so hard for. And so we just have to get over that roadblock. And start replacing those folks, and then also, starting to organize. And so I think that there's kind of maybe like a 50-50 of how that affects our strategy. Because I think that it actually could benefit us. I mean, we have the Democratic trifecta, we have the House, we have the Senate, we have the White House. And the fact that we aren't seeing the change that we need now isn't because they can't do it, it's because they won't. And that's a really good point to point out with people in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're running against Steny Hoyer, as you mentioned, one of the most powerful Democrats in the House. And a few weeks ago on our podcast, we talked to Mayor Colin Byrd, who's another progressive that's also running for the seat against Hoyer. You've both been endorsed by Marianne Williamson. And I'm just wondering if you have any concerns about the vote being split in this district. To my knowledge, Maryland does not have ranked choice voting or anything to that effect. And I'm just wondering how both of your visions could potentially maybe collaborate to help one another out instead of splitting the vote and allowing Hoyer to continue his rule over this district, which is far overstayed its welcome, I imagine.
Yeah, so I've actually had a conversation with Colin Byrd, and we have a mutual agreement that, during a certain time this year, we will be consolidating, because the main point is that Hoyer is out. That is the number one priority. But there's just a lot of things that are going to factor into that as far as metrics, and definitely redistricting that's going to be coming up this year. And so it's going to look a little bit different this time.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, this is your second time running. For anyone that's not familiar, you also ran the last cycle. And despite coming up short, I was really impressed by your campaign, bringing a lot of new and interesting ideas to the table, really, forcing Hoyer to answer for some of his policies, I think, putting that pressure on him to go leftwards, hopefully. And that's obviously something that's maybe not talked about enough, but even when candidates aren't successful the first or even second time they run, they certainly do succeed in applying that pressure to, fill in the blank corporate Democrat. And certainly with a, person like Steny Hoyer in a high leadership position in the party, it's important to have that pressure continually applied. And it's a good thing that there's candidates like you that are out there willing to do this unsung work that, frankly has a very low success rate, but you're willing to do it anyway and bring these, ideas to the table, bring attention to them. And I'm just wondering, what your strategy is going to be this time around. Obviously, last time around, it was a whole different, country we were living in. You were able to door knock more. But since this election isn't for, until 2022, I was wondering if you're, hoping that the vaccine has, been properly introduced to society to the point where you can knock on doors. Or are you planning a more robust or innovative digital strategy to get attention? I'm just wondering what you're thinking as far as kind of overcoming the media bias and certainly the name recognition and seniority bias that someone like, Steny Hoyer is going to be wielding against an insurgent progressive such as yourself.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So this time around, we definitely plan on building on the momentum and the movement that we started in 2020. And to be honest, it hasn't stopped. The work has been continuous. So that's number one. We're also concentrating on trying to fundraise as much as possible, as soon as possible. One of the lessons that we learned from 2020 was that we got support, but the only thing is we didn't get enough support as we needed early on, especially as it pertains to fundraising. For instance, I would say the last 3 or 4 weeks of the campaign, we raised $200,000, which was the entire amount of what we had raised throughout the entire cycle. And during that time, we can see the influx of votes and the margin of which Hoyer was winning getting smaller and smaller, to the point of election day where we won in-person votes. But that came from having that support and getting that surge of volunteers, that surge of endorsement, that surge of fundraising. And so at this point, we are concentrating heavily on fundraising. We don't know what it's going to look like because of COVID. We are hoping that we can 100% go back to knocking on doors, but we are preparing ourselves in case we need to run a very strong digital campaign. But good for us that our campaign started off 100% virtual. And so we are completely in our element at this point.
Speaking a little bit about the different country that we've been living in since the last time around, right? We've obviously, the entire nation's been economically and emotionally and physically ravaged by the COVID-19, and it's just salted a lot of wounds that were already open and gaping beforehand, right? And I'm thinking primarily about the housing issue and the housing crisis that our country's been experiencing really for decades, but it's culminated and compounded into such a devastating issue that it can no longer really be ignored. And that's why we're finally starting to hear about it, at least a little bit, in the way that we are. I read a statistic the other day that there were 2 million families in America that were at least 3 months behind on rent, often more than 3 months behind on rent. And, if the bottom falls out, right, that's just going to be 2 million homeless families. So I'm wondering, if you could talk about your strategy to provide homes for everyone, and kind of also a little bit about the way that this is real issue, this homelessness pandemic that we're having even before the COVID pandemic arrived, how that's presenting itself in your district, and just some of the ideas that you have to solve that. Because in the richest country in the world, we shouldn't have anybody that's homeless. I mean, this is a problem. It costs us more money criminalizing homelessness, sending police officers to destroy tent towns where people are just huddling in the most, just like, it's almost like going into a third world country and destroying slums because you think they're unsightly. I mean, it's really that kind of like soulless, just unconscionable behavior that we're doing, and it's actually less effective than just solving the problem. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so we actually have what we call a homes guarantee. And our plan, what it does is it fully funds the Section 8 program, because as it stands, I believe only 1 in 4 people who apply for Section 8 actually get it. And to do this, it would only cost $40 billion. To do it. They could have actually put this in the stimulus package. It would have made great sense. It costs less than committing acts of war and buying weapons for acts of war, $40 billion. But what it does is it also expands the eligibility requirements for those that are able to be on Section 8 to include undocumented people as well. And so this is something that would essentially end homelessness, because the problem is the long wait periods, which is because the program is underfunded. The problem is enough vouchers because the program is underfunded. The problem is we can't get enough people on the program because the program is underfunded. And so if we can fully fund it and also change the requirements to be on the program, that can help us to tackle homelessness. And what we're seeing now is the highlighting of the issue that we have already had with housing insecurity within our communities. And so what we're seeing now is people losing their jobs, not able to afford their rent. And then we're also seeing a lack of tenant rights. And so that's a whole nother issue as it pertains to housing, because we have these ending of the moratorium on evictions. And so people are able to be evicted. Landlords are able to do predatory acts against tenants. And we don't really have, at least in my district and in my state, we don't really have any landlord or tenant laws that, more so favor the tenant. And I know because I went through this with my landlord during the pandemic. I was threatened with eviction and had to fight that. And so, the problem is very multifaceted, but I think a huge part of it is fully funding the Section 8 program and then expanding the eligibility requirements.
That's an interesting point, and something that I hadn't actually heard proposed. We hear a lot of talk about, obviously, the need to provide housing for everyone. I think that's the first time I'd heard a proposal to expand the Section 8 housing program. So yeah, that sounds like a good idea to me. One of the other questions I did have for you, Mckayla, and obviously, with Joe Biden taking, the presidency, this is a, kind of a difficult thing to unpack. But, over the summer, there was obviously the, overwhelming demand by Americans from coast to coast in the wake of the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor murders by the respective police departments, and a sweeping demand for not just justice for those individuals, but justice for the people who came before them, and also a swift defunding of the police department. I mean, these were explicit terms that were made in the largest civil rights demonstration. I mean, all across the country, all 50 states, people were making these very explicit, very clear demands, you know, and it was basically just shrugged off, both by Donald Trump, who was president at the time, and now Joe Biden and, you know, Kamala Harris, who have since taken the administration. Obviously, Joe Biden was the author and champion of the 1994 crime bill, you know, which ruined the lives of so many Americans and made us the most incarcerated country on earth. You have a plan to achieve transformative justice. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how that plan came about and walk people through what that is.
Yeah, so my plan for transformative justice comes from personal experience, and also just witnessing what's happening in our communities and realizing that the system isn't broken, the system is fixed. It's working the exact way that it's intended to. And so when we say defund the police, what that essentially is working towards transitioning the way that we do policing. And so when we defund the police, it's saying that more police does not equate to less crime. Police do not prevent crime, they're reactionary. But what does prevent crime is mental health resources, equitable education, housing security, food security, etc. And so when we are investing funds into these industries or these entities that are meant to protect us, and that's not what they're doing, then those funds should be reallocated elsewhere. And so we want to, you know, get that message across. And I understand, you know, a lot of elected officials and others may be afraid of the term defund the police, but it's important for us to explain what that actually means. You know, because it's, you know, it's our duty to educate the community on why we're doing what we're doing and what this means, and for us to control the narrative and not the mainstream media to control the narrative, and not for centrists or, you know, centrist Democrats to control the narrative. And so what we want to do is, oh, you have it up here. But what we want to do is abolish all private prisons. We want to end cash bail. We want to create an actual criminal justice system, because we don't have a criminal justice system. We have a criminal legal system that's focused more so on incarceration instead of rehabilitation, instead of restorative practices. A huge hot topic in our district right now is the removal of SROs from the public school system. And a lot of the work that I've been doing on the ground since the last campaign is working to dismantle the school to prison pipeline because of my own experiences. And I'm not sure if people know this, but
could you talk about that?
Yeah. So when I was a youth, I was incarcerated for truancy, for running away from home. My aunt passed in the Pentagon on September 11th. And so just dealing with that grief, I wasn't given the resources that I needed. I was put on probation. And for every 1 day of school I missed, or even if I missed a class, if I was late to a class, that can land me 10 days in juvenile detention.
That's so barbaric. That's fucking crazy. Like, I can't even believe that.
And Steny Hoyer has actually signed on to every single crime bill that has ever been written. And in one of the crime bills, it actually included funding to increase the presence of SROs in public schools, which is another way that I've been directly impacted by the poor policy choices of Steny Hoyer. But we need a criminal justice system that works for everyone. And to be honest, and to be frank, if it were up to me, I would burn it all down and start over again.
Yeah, I was going to ask, could you consider yourself a prison abolitionist?
Yes. Yes.
Well, Mckayla, I'm wondering on an adjacent issue to your personal experience. Obviously, we hear the Democrats use language all the time about how they are in favor of reforming criminal justice, and often we see the leaders of the party kind of extend support to movements like Black Lives Matter, for example. Yet, quite hypocritically, they have elevated Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who, as Zac mentioned, wrote the crime bill, and you know, Kamala Harris, who was a notorious prosecutor. So I'm just wondering if you have any reaction to the Democratic Party elevating these figures who have not been part of the solution whatsoever. In fact, they've been architects of the problem in the quite literal sense. I'm just wondering if you have any solution to that, or not solution necessarily, but were you to get into Congress, what kind of solutions would you be proposing, and how would you be trying to force the conversation to your side? Because right now we have a lot of Democrats that, like I said, they use the right language sometimes, but they're really not there when it comes to these policies. And really, they just want to signal the support for these, cultural issues without actually getting behind the policies, such as defunding the police and reallocating those resources that are so vitally needed. And I'm just wondering what your plan is if you get in there, to maybe potentially point out and expose some of that hypocrisy, and to be that voice that we need, to just be identifying this problem as it is.
Yeah, I think it's important that we not just focus on the crime aspect part of things, because crime is only a symptom of so many other things. I think the approach to real transformative justice is multifaceted, because no one just wakes up one day and is like, I'm going to go rob someone, or I'm going to go steal $20 out of the cash register from where I work. To me, crime is an act of desperation because of lack of food security, housing security, affordable health care. I mean, we even see it in movies. How many movies are based on people committing crimes because they have a loved one that needs medical attention? I mean, we see this, like the movie John Q. But this is the reality that we're in. So if we can start to have that conversation about how the issue of criminal justice is multifaceted, it is so much more than defunding the police. It is so much more than reforming our courts. It's involving, healthcare that is provided to everyone. It's providing jobs that have livable wages, which, by the way, $15 isn't good enough. It's about making sure that people have an equitable education, that we're properly funding our schools. It's about making sure that we have affordable housing. It's about ending the predatory practices that exploit working class and working poor people. And so if we can have that conversation and talk about it from that standpoint, because the thing is, we can change the system, we can change the criminal legal system. But if we don't work on the other disparities that we have in our communities, and we don't work on these other issues, nothing will fundamentally change. And if the goal is to change things fundamentally, then we have to take that multifaceted approach. And as someone, like, if I were to make it to Congress, I would 100% hold my colleagues accountable. I'm the type of person where I don't hold my tongue, and I'm an activist and an organizer first. And so my first priority is liberation. And so anybody that seeks to get in the way of that is a problem. And so we just have to remind them of who they work for. They work for us. They represent us. And once it gets to a point where you are no longer representing us, then you don't deserve that seat at the table. And I think that should be made, very loud and clear when that's happening.
Well, I think that, to be frank, I think that's a frustration that I think a lot of people have already reached with people that they thought would, go into Congress and be activists. And of course, I'm referring to members of the squad who made promises like, I'm an activist first, not a politician. Yeah. So I'm wondering, just to kind of gauge that, how would you have responded at the beginning of this year when, a lot of people were saying, okay, we have leverage to hold up the nomination of Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House, for the Speaker of the House, somebody who not only doesn't support, but actively stands against almost every single thing that they ran on. And for some reason, we were supposed to do that because if we didn't, the $15 an hour minimum wage wouldn't pass. Go fucking figure, right? So I'm just asking, how would you have reacted to that? And do you think that they made the wrong move by just going ahead and supporting Nancy Pelosi without getting anything in return?
Yeah, I would say I would not have voted for Nancy Pelosi. And even, like, I understand, people hear it all the time. I'm an activist first, but I'm not only an activist, I'm directly impacted, which means that I don't have time to play. I don't have time to play, and I don't have time for people to play with me. And so that is where I'm coming from. And of course, Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leadership would have to earn my support. Just because you are elected doesn't change that. It don't change nothing. And so I would still have that same attitude. To the question of, if they were wrong for doing so, I won't necessarily say that they were right or they were wrong, but I will say that, I wouldn't have made that decision. And to be frank, Nancy Pelosi probably would have still been the Speaker of the House, regardless of
100%.
if they would have voted for them or not.
But on a principle thing. Yeah.
And so, but it's just like, as it pertains, right, to the principle of it, no, I would not have voted for her. Sure. You don't need my specific vote to become the Speaker of the House.
Well,
Mckayla, well, I think that's awesome. And sorry, Gavin.
Essentially, I think we were probably going to say the same thing, which is that was a really good answer, the kind of answer that I would want to hear from my elected representative. Certainly, I don't think it should be all that big of an ask of someone who's running on policies of a very explicit nature to then, find themselves in an oppositional nature to someone else in DC that doesn't support those policies. It seems like common sense to me. And here at the Vanguard, we are obviously spotlighting, progressive insurgent candidates that are on the vanguard of leftist thought. And certainly, your answers today, Mckayla, I think qualify you in that category. So we really, have been so impressed by what we've heard today. And we think you're really boldly identifying the problems, fighting for the correct solutions. And I genuinely hope that you're able to overcome these, barriers that are put up to progressive candidates and, succeed this time around and defeat Steny.
Yeah, anything to get Steny the fuck out of there. And also just to echo exactly what Gavin said, I think that's exactly the kind of thing that I would be hoping for in my representative. And also just progressives, I think across the board need to remember that it's not just Joe Manchin, it's not just Kirsten Sinema, it's not just these, neoliberal scapegoats that can exercise their power, right? We only have one person in the Senate, fine. But the Congress, if you add 10, 15 squad members together, that's a big bulk of Congress, right? And that means something, especially after, the Nancy Pelosi, the stalwart leader that she is, kind of bungled the House races in 2020. So it narrowed the divide and actually gave the squad more power effectively. So I think that you're definitely have the correct strategy in mind, and we really look forward to watching the rest of your campaign and having you back on the show and as things unfold.
Yeah, thank you. And to what you just said, I say we primary every single one of them.
Yeah, hell yeah.
And keep doing it until we succeed, because enough is enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people go to support you, Mckayla? And if they're maybe not in your district, can they still help out? Can they still do phone calls, or what's it look like at this stage in the campaign? Obviously, it's still pretty early.
Yeah, of course. So if people want to get involved, definitely go to our website, McKaylaWilkes.com. You can donate your time or you can donate your money, because we are grassroots. We don't take any money from any corporate interests or any super PACs. If you don't live in the district or anywhere close by, join our team, volunteer with us. You can help us phone bank. If phone banking isn't your thing, we have something what we call a grassroots cash crew, which is where we give volunteers their own ActBlue link, and they can circulate that within their networks. And we turn it into like a competition. It's really fun. But it's something that only takes a second. Like you can just copy and paste the text, send it to 5 friends, and bam, you raise like $100. Nice. So something really fun and something quick. So yeah, but if people want to get involved, those are the best ways.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, yeah, we've included those links in the description of this video. So anyone watching right now, make sure to check out those links. Check out Mckayla's wonderful platform, really in-depth policies, a lot of specifics that you just don't find on other campaign websites. Even progressives often
$15 an hour for prison workers, reasonable rates for prison phone calls. You pointed out on your website in Kentucky, it's like $5 to for 15 minutes on the phone with your loved ones. Meanwhile, you make like less than $1 a fucking hour if you're working. So you would, do the math on that, because I can't do that right now on the fly, but not great. So just kind of thorough, thoughtful policy on the website. Everybody make sure to check that out.
Yeah. And thanks so much, Mckayla. We really do appreciate your time today, and wish you the best of luck in this race. We stand in solidarity, and, have a great one.
Yeah take care.
You all too. Take care and be safe out there.